Hollywood has always been a place where love stories are written and rewritten, where romance blooms under the brightest lights and fades just as quickly when the cameras stop rolling. But every now and then, a confession emerges from Tinseltown that cuts through all the noise, all the glamour, and all the carefully managed public relations to reveal something deeply human. Kevin Costner, one of Hollywood's most enduring and celebrated stars, recently made exactly that kind of confession. At the age of 68, the man who gave audiences unforgettable films like Dances with Wolves, The Bodyguard, and Field of Dreams sat down and said something that stopped the world in its tracks. He pointed back across the decades of his life, past the marriages, past the rumors, past the heartbreaks both public and private, and said with quiet certainty that one woman had been the love of his life. That kind of honesty from a man who has lived so publicly and loved so visibly is worth exploring in full. To understand the weight of what Kevin Costner said, you have to understand where his journey with love actually began. Long before he was a Hollywood icon, before the Academy Awards and the blockbuster films and the tabloid headlines, Kevin Costner was a young man sitting in classrooms at California State University Fullerton, trying to figure out who he was and what he wanted from life. It was there, in the ordinary rhythm of college days, that he met Cindy Silva. By his own account, Costner was immediately overwhelmed by her. He spoke of her as someone who was more beautiful, more intelligent, and more grounded than he felt he deserved. There was no Hollywood spotlight on that relationship, no publicist managing the narrative. It was simply two young people falling genuinely and deeply in love. They married in 1978, and for a long time, it seemed like the kind of love story that defies the odds Hollywood so often stacks against its own. Together, they built a family, welcoming 3 children. Through the years, when Costner was still struggling to find his footing as an actor, Cindy stood beside him. She was there before the fame, before the fortune, before the world knew his name. That kind of loyalty and presence in a person's early life has a way of leaving a mark that time cannot fully erase, and it appears that for Kevin Costner, that mark never faded. But Hollywood, as it so often does, complicated things. As Costner's star rose through the 1980s and into the early 1990s, the pressures and temptations that come with fame began to cast shadows over the marriage. Rumors swirled around him throughout that period, with various names attached to his in gossip columns and entertainment reports. Whether those rumors held truth or were simply the price of celebrity, they did real damage. By 1994, after 16 years of marriage, Cindy and Kevin announced their separation. The divorce that followed was reportedly settled at a staggering $80 million, a number that reflected not just the financial scale of Costner's success, but also the magnitude of what was being dissolved. What was remarkable, even then, was how Costner responded publicly. In a 1995 interview, rather than deflecting blame or hiding behind carefully worded statements, he took direct responsibility for his role in the breakdown of the marriage. He expressed genuine remorse, not the performative kind that publicists script for damage control, but the kind that comes from a man confronting his own failures honestly. He spoke of the pain he had caused Cindy and their children. He acknowledged that she had been a supporter when he had nothing, and that he had not honored that support the way he should have. It was an unusually candid moment from a major Hollywood star, and it hinted at something deeper, a man who understood what he had lost even as he was losing it. In the years that followed the divorce, Kevin Costner's romantic life became one of the more closely watched storylines in celebrity culture. He was linked to various women, some confirmed, some rumored, each chapter adding to a narrative that the tabloids were only too happy to frame as the adventures of Hollywood's most eligible bachelor. There were brief connections with prominent figures from the worlds of entertainment and media. There was a relationship with Australian model and actress Elle Macpherson in 1996, a pairing that generated considerable public excitement. Costner himself spoke warmly about her at the time, expressing that he felt he had met his equal. But that relationship, too, ran its course within a year. The names and the stories kept coming, and with each one, the public perception of Costner shifted slightly. He was called a womanizer by some, a romantic by others. What those years actually represented, viewed from the distance of time, may have been something simpler and more understandable. A man who had loved deeply and lost that love was searching, sometimes wisely, and sometimes not, for something to fill the space it left behind. That is a human experience, even if it plays out very differently when you are one of the most famous actors on the planet. Eventually, Costner did find stability again. His relationship with Christine Baumgartner, which began in the late 1990s, led to marriage in 2004 in a ceremony held in Aspen, Colorado. They built a life together on his expansive ranch in Colorado, raised 3 children, and by most outward appearances created the kind of settled domestic life that Costner had spoken openly about wanting. He even took a significant professional step back, announcing a 4-year hiatus from filmmaking in 2011 to prioritize his family. For a man of his stature in the industry, that was a meaningful sacrifice, and it suggested a genuine commitment to getting this chapter of his life right. Yet even that chapter did not hold. In 2023, after 18 years of marriage, Christine Baumgartner filed for divorce. Reports at the time suggested tensions had been building around Costner's dedication to his hit television series Yellowstone, which demanded long stretches away from home. The divorce proceedings played out publicly, touching on financial agreements and custody arrangements for their 3 children. It was another painful and very public ending, and it left Costner once again navigating life without a partner after nearly 2 decades. It is against this full backdrop, the first great love, the public unraveling, the years of searching, the second long marriage, and its eventual end, that Costner's recent words carry such extraordinary weight. At 68 years old, having lived more romantic chapters than most people experience in a lifetime, he looked back and identified the one that mattered most. He said she was the love of his life, and the person he was describing was Cindy Silva. There is something profound about a man reaching that stage of life and arriving at that conclusion. It is not the kind of statement made lightly, nor is it the kind that benefits from being made publicly unless it is simply the truth demanding to be spoken. Costner did not frame it as regret in a self-pitying sense. It read more like recognition, an honest accounting of his own emotional history that he felt the world deserved to hear, or perhaps that he simply needed to say out loud. What does it mean to call someone the love of your life after everything that has happened between you? It means, among other things, that the connection you shared existed at a depth that subsequent relationships, however real and meaningful they may have been, could not fully replicate. Cindy Silva knew Kevin Costner before he was Kevin Costner the icon. She loved him when loving him offered no glamour or financial security. She raised children with him and supported his ambitions during the years when his ambitions were still just dreams. That kind of origin story in a relationship builds a foundation that is unlike anything that can be constructed later in life, when both people already know who they are and what they have. Costner himself has touched on this understanding at various points over the years, even when he did not frame it so directly. His public acknowledgement in 1995 of his role in the marriage's breakdown, the way he spoke of Cindy's unwavering support, the evident remorse he carried into the years that followed, all of these pointed toward a man who understood that something irreplaceable had passed through his hands. Following his most recent divorce, Costner was seen spending time with singer and songwriter Jewel Kilcher, a connection reportedly facilitated by mutual friend and entrepreneur Richard Branson at his private resort in the Caribbean. The images of the two together generated significant media attention, and sources described a warm and enjoyable dynamic between them. But even as that lighter chapter was unfolding, Costner's deeper reflection was clearly pointed elsewhere. A man can enjoy the present while still being honest about the past, and that seems to be precisely where Costner found himself. At 68, with the perspective that only comes from having truly lived, he was no longer interested in managing perceptions or crafting a narrative that served his public image. He was interested in the truth, and the truth, as he experienced and expressed it, was that Cindy Silva, the girl from California State University Fullerton, the woman who stood by him before the world knew his name, had claimed a place in his heart that no one else ever fully occupied. Hollywood loves a love story, but it tends to prefer the ones with happy endings, the couples who beat the odds and growl together on their ranch while the credits roll. Kevin Costner's story is not that kind of love story. It is messier, more honest, and in many ways more real than the ones that get wrapped up neatly. It is the story of a man who had the love of his life early, did not fully understand what he had, allowed it to slip away under the weight of fame and temptation and human weakness, and spent the following decades living with that knowledge. That he arrived at 68 willing to say it plainly, without spin or deflection, is in its own way a form of grace. It does not undo what happened. It does not restore what was lost, but it honors it. It tells Cindy Silva, wherever she is in her life, that what they had was real, that it mattered, and that the man she loved before he became a legend has never forgotten what she meant to him. In a world that constantly moves on to the next story, the next relationship, the next headline, there is something quietly powerful about a person who stops and says, "That one, that was the one." Kevin Costner said exactly that, and at 68 years old, with a life full enough to fill several biographies, he said it with the kind of certainty that only comes when a man has finally stopped running from the truth and decided to simply tell it.